Hello, welcome, good evening. This is Novara Live. My name's Bastani. I'm joined tonight by, I'm very happy to say, Kieran Andrieu. Kieran, how are we?
Well, I never, face to face. After all this time, I've been locked in that room for nearly 2 years, and now I'm sitting opposite you, Aaron. I'm feeling very good. How are you?
I'm feeling great. We had some sort of conspiracy theories on Friday that Michael and I were in fact in.
Well, shall we prove? There we go. That's not magic.
There we go. I mean, that would be pretty impressive production, wouldn't it? Coming up on tonight's show, Tony Blair has been given the boot. He's been removed from the Gaza peace plan following objections from Arab and Muslim nations. And we'll take a look at Piers Morgan's interview with white supremacist and bigot Nick Fuentes. As ever, if you'd like to support our work here at Novara Media, you know what to do. Go sign up at novaramedia.com/support. Help us build a new media for different politics. And of course, tonight, make sure to let me know what you think. Let us know what you think about the world and, of course, about the stories we're talking about. Send over your comments in the YouTube chat. Before we go to our first story tonight, I wanted to mention some breaking news that's very relevant to what we'll be discussing. A British soldier has today been killed in Ukraine. That appears to be the first death in the country of a serving member of the British military. The soldier reputedly wasn't on the front line, and it's being reported by the Ministry of Defence to have been an accident. But this, as I just said, is a first. A British serviceman has been killed in Ukraine. We'll talk about that more a little bit later.
Europe is being destroyed, but most European nations, they're decaying. They're decaying.
You can imagine some leaders in Europe are a little freaked out by what your posture is, and European.
No, they should be freaked out by what they're doing to their countries. They're destroying their countries.
Well, European Council President.
And they're people I like. Look, they're people I like. I get along with them. You know that. But they can't let this happen, and it gets to a point where you can't really correct it.
That was US President Donald Trump giving his current views on Europe to the Politico website last night. It follows the release last week of the Trump administration's new national security strategy that committed to paper the pivot we've witnessed from the United States away from Europe over the last 12 months. My colleague Michael Walker covered that in great depth on the show last night. But what's driving this breakdown in what has been for decades one of the most powerful geopolitical alliances on the planet? Well, first there's Ukraine. European leaders have thrown their support behind the country, making diplomatic maneuvers on its behalf with the Trump White House. The US has its own plan, now reportedly watered down by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and with European backing. That aimed at a quick end to the nearly 4 years long war. A particular sticking point is Trump's proposal that Ukraine trade territory for peace, a concession that European leaders fear would set a dangerous precedent in rewarding hostility and ultimately undermining European security. This was Donald Trump's take on their support for Ukraine.
They're not doing a good job. Europe is not doing a good job in many ways. They're not doing a good job.
I want to ask
you
about
talk too
that.
much, and they're not producing. We're talking about Ukraine. They talk, but they don't produce. And the war just keeps going on and on. I mean, 4 years now it's been going on, long before I got here. This is not my war. This is Joe Biden's war. And in terms of America, it's a very sad thing. And the only reason I really care about it is because I hate to see young, beautiful people being killed.
You know, this is a very serious topic, but before we did this show, I was saying to our writer, our producer, Stephen Methven, you can see Trump say beautiful, and he wants to say men. He has this obsession with calling men beautiful. But of course, women are serving on the front lines as well in this conflict. For a president who promised back in 2024 that he'd end the Ukraine war on day one, it's a bit embarrassing to be on day 337 and yet no closer to that goal. So of course, it has to be somebody else's fault. Zelensky has obviously been repeatedly blamed for that ongoing failure, and now Europe is getting a bit of stick too. But Ukraine isn't the only reason, and maybe not even the main one, for Trump's disgust with the continent. There's also the question of what the national security strategy called, and this is a quote, Europe's civilizational erasure. That's a nice phrase for a much more sinister concept.
How much should European leaders prepare for your administration to push to reshape the continent's politics?
Well, Europe is a different place.
What do you mean by that?
And if it keeps going the way it's going, Europe will not be, in my opinion, many of those countries will not be viable countries any longer. Their immigration policy is a disaster. What they're doing with immigration is a disaster. We had a disaster coming, but I was able to stop it. You know, we have no people coming through our borders now. 0, 7 months. I mean, who would believe 0? We went from millions of people, in some cases millions of people a month, but millions of people to no people.
That's not what Europe looks like.
The opposite, yeah. No, Europe, they're coming in from all parts of the world, not just the Middle East. They're coming in from the Congo, tremendous numbers of people coming from the Congo. And even worse, they're coming from prisons of the Congo and many other countries. And for some reason, they want to be politically correct, which actually I think is the opposite of politically correct. But they want to be politically correct, and they don't want to send them back to where they came from.
Now, it's really important to be clear on this. Europe, and let's talk about countries like Germany, the UK, France, remain much more white than the United States. So it's pretty extraordinary that Trump sees Europe as a place which is being diminished and undermined by immigration when America, both historically and in the present, has much more of it. Trump went especially hard on one city that he seemed to think was beyond salvation.
If you take a look at London, you have a mayor named Khan. He's a horrible mayor. He's an incompetent mayor, but he's a horrible, vicious, disgusting mayor. I think he's done a terrible job. London's a different place. I love London. I love London. And I hate to see it happen. Look at your mayor of London. He's a disaster. He's a disaster. He's got a totally different ideology of what he's supposed to have. And he gets elected because so many people have come in and they vote for him now because, you know, it's like, it's one of those things. But I hate what's happened to London, and I hate what's happened to Paris. I hate when I see it.
What does he mean? I mean, I was in Paris in February, March. It was stunning.
Yeah.
London, this time of year, is amazing. There's a reason so many people come and visit. Mm-hmm. So what's he talking about?
Well, but I mean, first of all, you have to wonder how much Trump actually sees either of those cities. I mean, both now and in the past. How much does Trump actually get to see London or Paris? How is he in any way, not just a reliable, but in any way a kind of qualified barometer of what London is, what's happening in London now, what's happening in Paris now? If he were right, it would be purely by accident because he spends all his time in limousines and being ferried around. He doesn't have a clue what he's talking about. The thing is it's unpopular on the left, you know, understandably, to reduce things to kind of psychological dimensions. But with Trump, it's impossible not to. There are loads of geopolitical and economic reasons why he's doing what he's doing, and we'll get onto those in a minute. But there are also, you know, very particular psychological reasons. And I think one is that he's just pathologically obsessed. He becomes pathologically obsessed with certain things, whether it's Sadiq Khan, whether it's you know, any number of things that whether it's his love of Scotland, whether it's his hatred of something else, whether it's his hatred of Somalis one week or a different ethnic group another week. He's just that way inclined.
It seems very strange because I think core to this, it just looks like disdain at this point for Europe and Europeans, is this idea that immigration to Europe is peculiarly Muslim. Mm-hmm. And that's true to an extent in so much as more Muslim migrants go to Europe than to the United States. And it's a different kind of Muslim migrant. It's less people displaced by war in Syria or Iraq or sanctions in Iran. It's more economic migrants. You know, Pakistani Americans, for instance, I think earn more than the median white American.
Yeah.
So it's a very different kind of immigration.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you're saying he doesn't have a handle on the reality of what London looks like in 2025. And by the way, it's not perfect. There's lots of things going wrong. But you look at homicide, you look at just everyday violence in the streets. It's nothing compared to Chicago, New York, which he would criticize as well. But they're his part of the world.
Yeah.
And what I'd say is I think this is about too much time on X. You know, we're seeing every single day at the moment this meme of US influencers. And of course, they get paid now for eyeballs, sharing that Norwegian tree in Trafalgar Square saying, look how crap it looks compared to this other tree in Lodz or Gdansk, in a second-tier Polish city, that's a Christian country. Britain isn't. Of course, if you go to Covent Garden, 10 minutes walk away, a gorgeous tree. The whole story of the tree in Trafalgar Square is it's donated by the Norwegians. It's decorated in a way that's kind of traditionally Norwegian. And I think he's just seeing the slop, right? A lot of it, by the way, is AI. A lot of it's misleading. A lot of it's fake. And I think, we talked about voters and consumers, consuming fake news. Mm-hmm. I think with Trump, we're now in this weird Ouroboros situation of the snake swallowing its own tail, where the president, who was the kind of innovator and disruptor par excellence when it came to making up bullshit, is believing the bullshit that he sees on his own timeline.
Yeah, it's a feedback loop. It's become a negative feedback loop. And I completely agree with that analysis. The main thing making London shit in 2025 is how expensive property is and the fact that very few people can actually afford to buy anywhere here or rent anywhere here. So, property developers, that's how Trump and his family made their money. That's the real offence on London streets. As you say, crime, violent crime, all manner of crime is declining. And so, yeah, I think that there is a violent feedback mechanism at play in which Trump is creating and also consuming the kind of mythos, the narrative that he's helped create, helped originate. That's definitely going on. But there are also geopolitical and economic things going on too. It's not just, there are rational dimensions to this. There's method to his madness. And I think, the thing with Ukraine, as you said, he said he would solve it on day one. He didn't solve it on day one. And so it's much easier, if you're Trump, to blame everybody else for that. You can't underestimate the kind of narcissistic or hubristic dimension to Trump's personality and by extension his presidency, his administration, and his way of doing statecraft. So I think that's a massive part of it. All of Europe is a sewer. And they're the ones who are preventing me from having my enormous success, geostrategic peace treaty success between Russia and Ukraine. The other thing is I think he wants to empower the right and the far right in Europe. I think he believes that, and his base believes, some of his base believes, that America benefits from a divided Europe, a divided and weakened Europe, which, to circle back to something you said earlier, Aaron, is quite extraordinary because it's been one of the most stable geostrategic alliances, that transatlantic alliance or relationship, over the past 200, 150 years. So for it to, it's definitely a marked shift in US imperialism, because let's not forget the Marshall Plan after World War II, investing in Europe, that was partly about US imperialism. It was about rebuilding Europe so that the US had stable allies and markets, context of the Cold War. It's a definite shift away from the mentality that kind of embodied. And I think it speaks to wider American decline, actually, but we can talk about that later.
As well, before we go on, clearly Trump has an issue with the size and scale of Europe's Muslim population. But guess where and which country has the most mosques in Europe? That's, of course, if you include this country in Europe. Answer, Russia. Mm-hmm. Russia has a huge Muslim population, unsurprisingly, because of the historic connections with Central Asia. And yet Trump doesn't seem to have any issues with Russia. It's Europe, which is the dump. It's Europe, which is the slum. Interesting that. The US has never been shy about meddling in other countries' elections, but usually they've tried not to be so vocal about it. Well, that's changed. The National Security Strategy celebrates what it calls the, quote, growing influence of patriotic European parties and pledges to cultivate, quote, resistance to Europe's current trajectory within European nations. Trump was asked about the prospect of overt US political interference.
Would you consider getting involved in some of those elections to put in leaders that you think are better suited?
Well, I've endorsed people, but I've endorsed people that a lot of Europeans don't like. I've endorsed Viktor Orban. I endorsed, go back to South America, Latin America, South America, Milei, Argentina. He was losing in the election, and I endorsed him, and he won in a landslide.
Yeah, with Viktor Orban, beyond endorsing, he recently said that you promised him access to U.S.-backed financial shield worth up to $20 billion. Is that right?
No, I didn't promise him, but he certainly asked for it. But
would you consider giving that to him?
I just think he's doing a very good job in a different sense on immigration. His country's landlocked. You know, he's got a different kind of a country. He doesn't have the sea, so he can't have ships coming in with energy. He's got a big pipe coming in from Russia. They've had it for a long time. It's a different situation he's got.
So would you consider some financial assistance there?
He's really gotten right is the immigration, because he allows nobody in his country.
He allows nobody in his country. I mean, Hungary is literally dying. I think Bulgaria, actually, surprisingly, has one of the highest fertility rates in Europe, but its population is about 25% smaller than it was in 1989. Now, one country on the European continent was pretty happy with the national security strategy. Russia, which is not criticised in the document, said it, quote, aligns with Russia's vision. That is, America aligns with Russia's vision. Trump's advisor, Sebastian Gorka, appeared on Politics Live today to answer questions regarding that argument.
Should I draw from that you are looking at Europe and thinking there is more criticism in this document of Europe, some would say, than there is of Russia? Is that fair to conclude? And from your answers, that you don't want to answer whether Russia's an immediate threat?
It's not a binary choice. It's a fallacious dichotomy. Your premise of your question is wrong.
Do you think that Russia's a threat?
I'm not going to answer the question, no matter how many times you ask it. The war is the threat. The war is the threat to peace in general. The president is right. Thousands of young Ukrainians and Russians being killed every single week. That's the threat. That's why the president has brought 8 peace treaties to fruition in 8 months. As he said just yesterday, Russia and Ukraine will be number 9. I'm not going to be caught or pulled into some BBC fake news questioning. It's peace that is our priority.
I'm not going to be brought into some fake news. What are you doing there if it's so terrible? Of course, Russia is a threat to the United States. It's potentially a threat to anywhere, not an active threat. But it's really important to remember Russia has more than 5,000 nuclear warheads. They're there for a reason. It's to deter, so the thinking goes, conventional war between it and other countries. So all countries are, with this nuclear doctrine, potentially threatening all other countries. Therefore, war doesn't break out. What did you make of that interview with Seb Gorka on the BBC?
Well, he's characteristically pugnacious. I like to think above taking the piss out of the way people look, but he looks increasingly, it is him, so I think it's probably okay. He looks increasingly like Lord Krang, the speaking brain from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I think it's kind of totally of a piece and consistent with everything that the Trump administration has said about Russia from the very start. And I have been lambasted on here before, rightly so, for saying that one of the best explanations I think I have is that Trump must be compromat. I can't figure out quite why he is so willing to be supine, always so supine with Putin. I get that he has a different approach to the Ukraine-Russia war. And indeed, we did a show probably a year and a half ago in which we said, it's good that there are talks happening. And any kind of very, very mild or moderate hope that we had for those talks, and it was mild or moderate hope, was dashed more or less immediately because I cannot explain Trump's conduct around Putin except that he is very clearly compromised in some way. And again, it's cheap in a way to talk about individuals and compromat and, blackmail when you're talking about international geopolitics or issues of huge geopolitical significance. But some characters make it difficult not to, and I think Trump is one of those characters. No doubt there are probably also geopolitical calculations at play as well. But I put that over to you. What do you think? Do you think I'm on something?
Well, I think, you have to think about it, right? There is the argument, which is Trump is not going all in on Russia. He's irrationally friendly with Russia precisely because, not necessarily him, but the people around him, his administration, recognize the major challenge of the 21st century to US global hegemony comes from Asia.
Right.
You have to pacify that, quote, Russian threat. You have to create something of a rift between Russia and China in order to pacify Asia. If you allow China to have ASEAN, if you allow its sphere of influence to be the whole of East Asia, Southeast Asia, which of course the whole Taiwan conflict feeds into that, and if you allow this global energy juggernaut to be best friends with China, then, and I think this is true, by the way, then you basically give global hegemony to China on a plate. I think that's obviously true. And I think that's a perfectly eloquent critique of basically the Biden presidency. I actually agree with it. Right? I haven't got a dog in the fight.
Yeah.
Right? I think there's probably upsides to bipolarity rather than one of the two countries having unipolarity, which is to say being all-powerful, much in the way the United States has been since 1945. But clearly, I think, Trump doesn't necessarily think that. Otherwise, he wouldn't be putting tariffs potentially on the likes of South Korea,
right,
Japan, Taiwan. He's very much a sui generis guy. I think he makes lots of stuff up on the hoof. Mm-hmm. I do think lots of people say that with regards to Britain, he likes Britain, or at least he likes our institutions, so he gives us a little bit of an easier ride. I mean, that's probably true,
right,
compared to the continental Europeans. I think he hates Europe. There's something really weird going on. I think he really hates old Europe. And I think he views, particularly the continent, but Britain as well, a bit like the people who lived in his father's tenements and apartment blocks decades ago when he was going around collecting rent and they were late, or they were delinquent on rent, as he would say. I think he views Europe as akin to that.
Right.
They've been getting something for nothing. They've been complacent. They've not been paying their way. They're entitled. So these are all characteristics which Trump doesn't like in people. And he views the world really through the prism, I think, of personal relationships. He looks at nations really as people. A country is either hardworking or it's lazy. And I think that explains quite a lot. And by the way, we'll talk about this, I'm sure, for the next 12 months, the next couple of years. There's something to that. Europe hasn't been paying its way. Europe has been defaulting to the United States for a bunch of reasons because it gets effectively a peace dividend.
Yeah.
Which, of course, wasn't a peace dividend. It was the United States was internalizing the costs of your defense. You were under the protection of the American umbrella. You were subordinate in the US empire, aka NATO. Now, of course, until 2 years ago, if you said that to somebody on the left, you'd have the entire liberal media and much of the right, and by the way, much of the Labour Party too, calling you crazy. Right? If you said NATO is an instrument of US empire, they would call you crazy. And if you said, like Jean-Luc Mélenchon, or I think probably us as well a couple of years ago, yeah, we probably should think about a post-NATO world because the United States isn't going to basically fund our security forever. If you said that in the 2019 general election, you'd be torn to shreds. But now, Russi and the defence establishment, the MOD and Keir Starmer and the power brokers in Number 10 and Westminster and across SW1 in London, they're all having that precise conversation because they've been blindsided by this. Even though Trump won in 2016,
yeah,
for some reason they didn't want to have to think about it. It's really reminiscent to me of Brexit. One of the major reasons why, and I voted Remain in the end, one of the major reasons why the political class didn't want leave, or two reasons, is that they didn't want to be in charge of trade and immigration policy. They didn't want the responsibility. Brussels can do that because then when people get upset with something, we can blame Brussels, right? Oh, well, we're not in charge of our borders. We're not in charge of trade policy. We don't actually want to be the people with political control of our country. We want the nice cars. Right? We want to maybe do some little adjustments here and there where we can get some status and prestige. We want to be on good terms of business because when we leave Number 10 or when we leave the, I was going to say Versailles, it's not that anymore, the Élysée Palace, right? When we leave those places or we leave, the Reichskanzlei, it's not called that anymore, maybe we should call it that again, the chancellorship in Berlin, when we leave those places, we can then go into business, right? That was the plan, and I think basically we've had a slow but steady return of history after 2008. Great line I saw recently, the 21st century started in 2020. Probably some truth to that, right, with COVID. And I think we now have a political class, particularly in Britain, but also continental Europe, who are really shocked at the rapid dismantling of the post-Cold War world.
Yes. I mean, there's not much to disagree with there. What I would just say as a final point, though, bringing us to back to Russia is the point you initially made. I mean, you gave yourself the contradiction to it, which is that there is total inconsistency if what Trump is trying to do is bring Russia in to under US auspices in some manner, or bring them closer to the US orbit and away from China, because, as you said, they are also slapping tariffs on Korea. They're also alienating other states that would be allies of China or in the Chinese ambit. And so there's just a missing link for me. I don't quite understand why it is. And even if that were the case, there's another way of doing it. I mean, Bill Clinton isn't somebody I tend to quote very often, but recently he said, when he was talking about Putin, he was saying, I was very, very blunt with him behind closed doors. You could be very blunt with him behind closed doors. And then externally, you would present a united front. And a united front didn't just mean being sycophantic. It meant holding our positions in front of the cameras and then being blunt with each other when the doors were closed. And Trump doesn't do that. Trump, I think, actually makes strategic errors in public if what you want to do is maintain the sense or impression that the US is on top of this. And that even if it were the case that he's trying to bring Russia in and charm Russia and blandish Russia, there would be a way of doing it that doesn't make him look like such a buffoon. And number two, so I think that ultimately it doesn't make any sense to me. And I think it must be rooted in something that we don't have information on.
Yeah, I think that when they announced they were putting tariffs on Taiwan, and of course Taiwan has this $1 trillion company, TSMC, which makes basically the world's most advanced chips, then you think, okay, I could see some kind of grand strategy in the background, maybe, but this completely shatters that illusion. In the background of the national security strategy is a brewing confrontation with Europe over its attitude towards US tech firms. On Friday, the European Commission fined Elon Musk's platform, X, 120 million euros over breaches of European digital laws. According to the Commission, X broke laws over what it called the site's, quote, deceptive blue tick scheme, you can say that again, and a lack of transparency regarding advertisers. They are still investigating claims that X disseminated illegal content under EU laws and has failed to tackle the spread of misinformation, a legal obligation within the bloc. The reaction to the European Union enforcing its own laws from some US politicians has been intense. This was from Secretary of State Marco Rubio. The European Commission's $140 million fine isn't just an attack on X, it's an attack on all American tech platforms and the American people by foreign governments. The days of censoring Americans online are over. I'll translate. The days of Europeans being able to enforce European laws in Europe are over. So much for sovereignty. Rubio's deputy, Christopher Landau, was equally unhinged, replying to Rubio's post with this. What's even worse is that the US is in a military alliance, all caps, with the very countries attacking us via the EU. As VP JD Vance noted earlier this year, this contradiction cannot continue. The nations of Europe cannot look to the US for their own security. At the same time, they affirmatively undermine the security of the US itself through the, quote, unelected, undemocratic, and unrepresentative EU. I wonder who elects the American Supreme Court. Just a thought. This fine is just the tip of the iceberg. As I mentioned to every European leader I just met at the NATO ministerial meeting in Brussels, the EU's support of the communist and anti-American regime, where the hell is this going? Regime in Cuba is another striking example of the EU affirmatively undermining US security, while the vast majority of its member states look to the US for their own security via NATO. Under @POTUS, @Real Donald Trump, @VP, @JD Vance, @Sec Rubio, the time for games is over. Unregulated platforms obviously have the advantage of increasing MAGA influence over European countries. They're a tool of soft power, dare I say propaganda. But an interesting column in the FT today suggests there may be more material issues at play and more material consequences down the line. The paper's chief US commentator, Edward Luce, pointed this out in that piece. Hardly a day goes by when Trump is not cloistered with one of his Silicon Valley allies. In addition to Musk, David Sachs, the White House AI czar, and Jensen Huang, CEO of NVIDIA, are rarely far from the Oval Office. NVIDIA, of course, being a $4 trillion company the world's most valuable. They get what they want. Trump plans to issue an executive order banning America's 50 states from regulating AI. So much for state rights. There should be one national rule and nothing more, he says. Since there is no prospect of serious federal regulations, AI companies will continue to have carte blanche. The AI gold rush has sustained US growth, almost half of which this year has come from powering the LLMs. That's, of course, large language models. The cost of Trump's capture by Silicon Valley shows up in his declining approval ratings. Kieran, quickly, is this now a government, an administration, completely in ad hoc, completely captured by these companies, Nvidia, Meta, Alphabet, because as that extraordinary statistic just said, 50% of US growth is now coming from this tiny group of multi-trillion-dollar companies.
Yeah, and I think it was always predictable. It speaks to the kind of animal spirits that Trump has always said he wants to kind of evoke in the US economy. And he sees it, I think, probably not wrongly, as the revival of US capitalism. I mean, imagine US capitalism without Silicon Valley. You could argue there's an opportunity cost point. Resources that are allocated in Silicon Valley could have been put elsewhere. Nonetheless, try and imagine US capitalism over the past 25 years without big tech. You've got financial crisis, so finance are on the naughty step, declining domestic production, all sorts of across all sorts of firms and sectors. So yeah, I think that increasingly, and there's been a big shift of the dial from when Trump came into power as well. I think increasingly you can see it week by week that he is in hock to big tech, and it is kind of a reversal, because when he first came into power, I think people were saying, "Wow, big tech is frightened of Trump." Mm. They're all lining up, fawning over Trump, falling over themselves to promise things. And of course, there's a lot of that going on behind the scenes. Of course, still there is, I'm sure. But Trump needs them just as much as they need him, maybe more. And it's pretty depressing.
I would also say we're talking about the kinds of sticks and carrots that Trump and the Americans can use with Europe, and indeed elsewhere. This is critical infrastructure for us. If Europe doesn't have Amazon, Meta, Alphabet, we're screwed, folks. You're certainly not watching this show on YouTube, right? And I've said this time after time, whether it's our payment systems from Apple Pay and Visa to project management and office software, Microsoft, Google, right, to pretty much everything else. We recently sold tickets to our event. Dice was a British company. It was recently bought out by an American firm. You have basically no access to the logistical possibilities of running a modern business without these companies, which is why this country, and many others, don't get too upset about it, is a vassal state to America. We're an extraordinary moment, and if that comes apart, my goodness. In a way, though, as Cory Doctorow says, could be a great opportunity.
Right.
For a post-American internet.
Yeah, and just briefly on that, because I know we're running out of time in this segment, but one of the ironies of the fact that so many nativists in Europe hate the EU is that one of the things the EU did very, very well until about 2005, 2006 and beyond, one of the things it did extremely well was actually protect Europe's workers, Western European countries that are obviously member states of the EU, create this kind of social Europe with lots of social protections. And one of the things it did was absorb what you might call market pressures, globalized market pressures. And that can manifest in all sorts of ways, protections for labor, but it can also be fines to big tech companies if they try to squirrel away their taxes in Europe or refuse to pay their taxes in Europe where they've been operating. And so, yeah, those bulwarks are absolutely critical. Rebuilding those bulwarks, which were torn down in the early 2000s, will be critical to any kind of post-American, pro-European or domestic European tech industry.
Yeah. If you want to watch that Cory Doctorow interview, by the way, we published it on Sunday. Phenomenal interview. Amazing, amazing speaker, as well as thinker. Just very, very funny and captivating to watch. Just putting Cory Doctorow and Novara Media into YouTube. Watch the whole thing. It's great. Before we go to our next story, we've got a special offer over at the Novara Media bookstore. We're taking on Amazon our very selves. We're prefiguring that post-American internet. I've put together a collection of my favorite books from 2025. They include Breakneck by Dan Wang, Empire of AI by Karen Howe, and Between the Waves by Tom McTague. 3 sensational books. I spoke to all of them for Novara Media's Downstream show. All of them have 10% off their individual prices. What a great way to buy your Christmas presents for a loved one or simply somebody you want to propagandize to this year. There's also a collection by Ash Sarkar. Those are available from shop.novaramedia.com. Other books there as well. It's quite a selection these days. Kieran, I'm going to put you on the spot. Any take your fancy? Any that you think, you know what, I've got a few days off in December, I might have a good read?
Of the specific selection just shown?
Of the books you've seen on the Novara Media bookstore. Come on. Have you read Breakneck?
I haven't.
Well, there you go. We'll just lie.
But what I do is I watch Downstream. And so I see you interviewing the people who wrote these books. And if I haven't read them, I at least do that.
I do recommend Downway. Michael Walker, not that credentials matter, LSE, Oxford. Whenever I say to Michael, have you read this book? He goes, no, but I listened to the podcast. It's the same thing. I read the Wikipedia. It's not often that we get to bring you a bit of good news on this programme. Not our fault. Just the times we're living in, I'm afraid. But we've got a glimmer of sunshine for you right now, a fragment of light punching through the winter grey. Former Prime Minister Tony Blair has been canned as a possible member of the board tasked with overseeing Donald Trump's Gaza reconstruction plan. Now, Blair was the only potential board member mentioned by name in that plan. And the sacking came about after Middle Eastern and Arab leaders reputedly objected to his presence regarding all of this, not least because of his role in the 2003 US and UK-led invasion of Iraq. Didn't go very well. They were also concerned that during his time as Middle East envoy for the Quartet, representing the UN, EU, Russia and United States, Blair was seen as being more favourable to Israel than the Palestinians. That seems to be a trend that continued during Israel's genocide in Gaza. Israeli newspaper Haaretz reports that Blair became a frequent visitor to the office of Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, while he was ordering the mass slaughter of thousands of Palestinian children. Just two guys with a lot in common, hanging out, maybe having a beer, who knows. But that's the end of the good news, because the Trump peace plan, though peace hardly seems its aim, has a lot more to worry about than losing Tony Blair. Despite a ceasefire being declared 2 months ago, little progress has been achieved. The enclave has now been split in two, with Palestinians restricted to half their previous territory. Any attempt to leave the so-called red zone is met with violence. No journalists have yet been allowed into the Strip, and there remain restrictions on food aid and medical aid. And in that time, over 300 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli fire in the enclave. Aerial strikes have continued on Gaza throughout, with an encampment for displaced people in Al-Masawi struck just last week as people slept. 5 Palestinians were killed, including, tragically, 3 children. The UN has also said that a shockingly high number of children are still suffering from acute malnutrition in the Strip, with more than 9,000 hospitalised for the condition in October alone. 9,000! 9,000 kids hospitalised, and you still have people in Britain's political and media class saying there's no problem with regards to food and people getting hold of it. And Israel's military strategy, even by its own standards, has been shown to have failed completely. Though weakened by 2 years of war, Hamas still dominates Gaza, with Israeli intelligence officers telling the New York Times the group is rebuilding, quote, day by day. Kieran, you've gone on record as saying that this isn't really a cessation of the genocide, it's just a temporary slowing down. Predictions are a dangerous game, but where do you think this particular process is heading in 2026?
I would love to say that it's not going to take the form of resumed escalation, full escalation, but I fear that it will. And if it's not in 2026, it will be probably at some other juncture that's politically expedient for Israel's political class. And that's the sad truth of it. One thing that I think maybe we haven't ever, I haven't brought out enough, is that often the bombings of Gaza coincide almost perfectly with an election cycle in Israel. Obviously, October 7th was slightly different, and the genocide that followed it, because that was set off by a very specific event. But prior to that, 2014, 2012, all the way back to 96, I think, Netanyahu has former in starting these offensives when it's politically expedient to him, i.e. in the context of an election cycle, or because he's being hunted by Israel's political class or something like that. So I don't think it will have anything to do with facts on the ground. I think it will be determined by things of a higher order, i.e. Israeli politics. And just to say on Tony Blair, you know, I suppose in one sense it's good that he's been refused entry to any kind of transitional governance structure, but only in the sense that it means he doesn't get what he wants. He's kind of, you know, a miasma that floats around and reinvents himself. And on that level, it's very nice that he doesn't get to further launder his crimes by participating in some technocratic colonial government in Gaza. But beyond that, I have to say, I think it has virtually no significance. I think whether Tony Blair's there, whether Tony Blair's not there, he's basically a node in a process that will be determined far away from him.
If you think it's an illegitimate process, or it's a process that's not advantageous to Palestinians, one of those two things, it's probably better for him not to be involved from the perspective of those guys, right? Because it would be perceived as more legitimate if it doesn't have this crazy guy who was one of the, you know, the chief prosecutors of an illegal war in Iraq, which maybe, according to The Lancet, accounts for 1 million dead people, right? Which created the conditions to the rise of ISIS. Maybe it makes this whole thing actually more legitimate. Maybe you want it to be delegitimized by the presence of this moron.
Oh, well, I think that's right. And I think Tony Blair's association with this process is an artifact. It's a remnant of a time when Trump wasn't sure he'd be able to get this deal through politically. So he thought, well, whoever attached Tony Blair to the administration and to this process thought maybe he'll confer some degree of legitimacy on this process. Whoever thought that obviously is crazy. And Trump maybe was more amenable to it because it was at that time clear that he was going to be able to sell it politically. It worked. You know, the process is now in play. So I think at that point, you're absolutely right. Anybody who thinks that Tony Blair has got clout to bring to anything is totally and utterly delusional and dreadful in their judgment. So I think it's probably an artifact of an earlier time when it seemed politically less feasible. And now they realise they don't need Tony Blair. I mean, who wants Tony Blair associated with anything?
I can almost hear Peter Hitchens ringing in my ear. Sir Anthony Blair. Before we go to our next and final story, I was speaking about our shop.novaramedia.com. We have loads of great merch for Christmas, new T-shirts, new bags, book collections. One of those book collections includes the Palestine book bundle. Maybe we can get that up, maybe we can't, doesn't really matter. That's available for £37.50. You've got We Are Not Numbers, Gaza, The Story of a Genocide, did a great event. You were on that panel as well. Indeed. And Lobbying for Zionism by Ilan Pappé. 3 fantastic books. If you're looking to buy gifts for people that are political, I think books are such a great way to do it. Lobbying for Zionism is, I think, 650 pages, so it might be a little bit heavy going, but Ilan Pappé generally is superb. And the Gaza book, if you're just looking to gently persuade somebody in your life who has maybe expressed some political views, which you think, well, that's good, they're sympathetic, let's put some meat on the bone, I really recommend that. It's good activism, folks. Buying these books for people in your life and getting them to join the dots. Any recommendations in terms of good books that people should buy for friends, family, lovers for Christmas?
On Palestine?
Anything at all, but political.
Okay. Can I go very far back?
As far as you like.
Okay. I think everybody should read The Great Transformation by Karl Polanyi.
Well, that's pretty heavy duty, right?
I know, but, you know, so what? Christmas isn't just for sherry and mince pies.
Yeah.
Can't they read about how capitalism devours its children on Christmas Day? Isn't that nice?
You've been seeing somebody for 3 months and then you buy The General Theory by Keynes. I mean, maybe, you know, go a bit easy at first.
This gives me the opportunity to correct. Well, I realised earlier I made it seem like I don't read. I do. What I mean is when I haven't had a chance to read the books yet, I watch Downstream, and so should everybody. That's all I meant. But yeah, okay. I'm sorry. I'm not budging. The Great Transformation by Karl Polanyi.
There is a great new edition of it by our friends at Penguin. The good thing with the Gaza book, The Story of a Genocide, is that it's a collection of essays, right? One is really powerful. It's only 6 pages long, so it won't be hugely demanding in terms of reading time. Last night, Piers Morgan did a 2-hour interview on his YouTube channel, Piers Morgan, Uncensored, with far-right commentator Nick Fuentes. And Nick Fuentes is an extremist. He's no doubt captivating and sometimes funny, but he's also, frankly, insane and a bigot. Maybe you think I'm wrong. Maybe you think my comments are ill-judged. Well, watch this and judge for yourself.
The beauty of what I'm going to talk to you about in this interview is that almost all of it is just going to be reminding you what you have said and asking you what you meant. Your position about that story is that it was a joke, okay? I want to come to something else you said. This is where you talk about Jews, women, and blacks. Let's just take a listen.
They're always coming up with, no, it's not the Jews. No, it's not women. No, it's not blacks. It's actually really complicated. No, it fucking isn't at all. Jews are running society. Women need to shut the fuck up. Blacks need to be imprisoned for the most part. And we would live in paradise. It's that simple.
Okay. Would you like to clarify what you meant there?
That's all true. That's 100% true. Everything I said in that clip is true.
Including that blacks need to be imprisoned for the most part.
Yeah. Yes.
But all of them?
No, for the most part.
What does the most part mean? What percentage of American blacks would you like to see in prison?
Whatever the percentages of the murderers. I think it's 1 in 20 black men will commit a murder in their lifetime. So maybe let's say that, 5%.
Oh, so you're talking about black people who murder people?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I'll tell you, black people agree with me because they're tired of it too. And maybe not most of them, but a lot of them agree with what I say about that because they know how it is. That's why the first thing they do when they make a little bit of money is they go and leave to another neighborhood.
Okay. So what was just remind me again, the percentage of black men who commit murder in America. What was the percentage you gave me?
It's 1 in 20. 1 in 20.
It's 1 in 100.
No, it's 1 in 20.
No. Less than 1 in 100 black US men commit murder. That's the most up-to-date crime statistics in America.
That's not true. I've seen other statistics. They say 1 in 20 will eventually commit a murder.
So your rate means that you're saying that 5 times as many black men commit murder as the official crime statistics say?
Yeah, there's a report, I believe, on X by Data Hazard. I'll have to go and double check that for you. But yes, there's some pretty shocking evidence that says that it's far more alarming than you would think. But I mean, whether it's 1 in 20 or 1 in 100, that's a lot of people, Piers. I mean,
sure,
this is
a lot of white
problem.
people commit murder too. Well, they do, don't they?
Okay, but it's about proportionality. I mean, white people are 65% of the population. Blacks are 13%. And I think anybody would tell you that more black people proportionally commit violent crime than white people, and people vote with their feet. People would rather pay a much higher property tax.
Most mass shootings.
What's with the interruptions?
I'm sorry.
Thank you. I appreciate that. You know, you look at in Chicago, in New York, these neighborhoods are so stratified. People would rather pay a high tax rate. They'd rather pay a much higher property value to live in a less diverse, less black neighborhood because they don't want to live around the violence. And I think that when you look at even on the public transit, the subway, the blue line, you know, people don't want to go there because they know who occupies and menaces the public transit. It is these people like Daniel Penny had to deal with. It's people like Irina Zarutska had to deal with. And that's just the uncomfortable reality.
So much nonsense here. That final comment, people are willing to pay more to not live in diverse communities like San Francisco and New York. Are you crazy? 2 very diverse, multiracial places which have a premium if you want to live there. Same with London. These are cheap hellholes and people pay more money to live elsewhere. Are you kidding? No, London is the most expensive place to live in the UK. And just to be clear on the homicide rate thing, because this is key. Firstly, he's saying, well, what's the difference between 1 in 20 and 1 in 100? The difference is 5 times. But importantly, Piers Morgan wasn't correct. The Gemma network has data regarding homicide offences between 2000 and 2019 for black males aged 15 to 24 who committed homicide, which of course is going to be, they're the most likely because younger people, it's 74.6 per 100,000. 74.6 per 100,000 of black males aged 15 to 24 between 2000 and 2019. 74 per 100,000. Not 1 in 20. Okay? 74 per 100,000. For black males aged 25 to 44, it falls to 70 per 100,000. Not 1 in 20, not 1 in 100, significantly low. I mean, 1 in 20, Kieran, is so insane. It's kind of like what a civil war would be like that. And I know he would probably say rhetorically, well, it's like a civil war. No, it's nothing like a civil war. You're saying that from the comfort of your studio, making loads of money, getting the super chats. This is wild, right? I mean, just having his numbers so far off. And I know somebody like Nick Fuentes doesn't care about numbers. He cares about vibe and aesthetics and being captivating and being funny. That's all he cares about. But he's out by so much, you immediately just think, this guy's a moron. I mean, there are clever... Alex Jones would say wild shit all the time. He would very rarely get something that wrong.
But he's drawing on a rich reservoir of white supremacy in the United States when he says that it's a civil war. Civil war was what was invoked during Reconstruction after the American Civil War in the 1860s and 1870s and 1880s by the Ku Klux Klan. Civil war is what was invoked in the early 20th century by the lynch mobs who would lynch African Americans across America. And civil war was what was invoked as well by the kind of American Nazi Party and the remnants of the Ku Klux Klan in the 1950s and 60s with the Civil Rights Movement and the Black Panthers and so on. Civil war is exactly what he wants. And that's why he's saying 1 in 20, precisely because those are the kind of statistics you would expect to see in a civil war. He wants he knows the difference. I don't think he's particularly clever, but he's clever enough to know that it's not 1 in 20. I'm confident of that. But he wants his disciples, his acolytes, to believe that white people are engaged in a civil war with African Americans and non-whites in the United States. And as I say, there's a rich kind of intellectual lineage to draw on in that. Final point about him, I think, is that I think Western discourse over the past 15, 20 years, it's almost like a game of Jenga has been being played by would-be political entrepreneurs. Let's see who can say the most outrageous thing. Let's see how outrageous we can possibly be until the whole thing comes tumbling down. So pushing the envelope further and further and seeing how far you get. And to me, Nick Fuentes is kind of just like the logical conclusion, the kind of, sorry, but platonic ideal of that kind of game of Jenga, of sort of plastic fascist shithousery.
Yeah. I mean, again, just going back to this number, he starts out by saying most African Americans, most black people should be in prison. Most, as in a majority, presumably 51% at least. And then he's challenged on that and he says, well, okay, the people that kill other people, it's 1 in 20. Of course, that's not most, right? That would be 5% of the male black population. Of course, that number is wildly out by orders of magnitude. So what he's instead saying is that when it comes to black males 25 to 44, it's 70 per 100,000. Mm-hmm. He's saying those people should be in prison. Guess what? Of course they should be in prison if they killed somebody. Mm-hmm. That's actually not a radical statement, but you're right. He's saying this stuff, trying to talk it into reality. And let's go back to that interview.
I'm a new generation of white person. I'm not living around blacks. Sorry. You know, I want white kids, and I don't want my white kids bringing home black people to marry. It's racial for me. And call me racist. Oh, very Christian of you. I don't give a fuck.
I mean, it couldn't be clearer, really, unless you want to say that's another of your jokes. But you're basically saying, yeah, I'm a racist, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
You're fine with saying you're a racist?
Totally. I think everybody's racist. I think everybody, if we're being honest, is racist. I think everybody, the only people that aren't racist or pretend not to be are white people to their detriment. Everybody else is racist.
But earlier in the interview, you got aggrieved at the idea that your father was a racist. You You wanted to make emphatically
because
sure
my father's...
He's not.
Because my father doesn't share my same views on that.
So he's the exception to the everyone's a racist.
Well, everybody's a little bit racist. You're right. So maybe everybody... The difference is you're attacking my father. You know, he could get fired from his job.
I'm not attacking your father.
You are.
No, I'm not. I don't know your father. And to be clear, I have no knowledge about him at all
Well, then let's leave him out of it. Let's leave him out of it if you don't know him.
Hang on, Nick. You put that story into the public domain on your show. I'm simply reminding you of what you told everybody, millions of people, about your father. If you now want to retract it, fine. If you want to say it was a joke, which is what your position was earlier, fine. But I'm allowed to put to you things you've said publicly. That's not unfair. That's not me targeting your father. You put that story about him out there.
You know what you're doing. You know what you're doing.
I'm asking you about a pretty shocking anecdote, which to me looked like you were saying your father made decisions about where you as a family would eat based on skin colour of people who worked at these places. If you say, or use them, if you say that is not what you meant, that's fine. You can respond any way you like. But the idea I can't ask you about it without you saying I'm attacking your father is ridiculous.
Well, you are, and you know what you're doing. And there's a political culture in America where if you have the wrong views, you get fired from your job. And my father has a job. And if you go on here and say you charge him with racism or something, and I'm put in a position where I don't look like I'm sticking to my guns if I don't say my father's a racist, you're putting him in jeopardy. And he's not here to defend himself or explain his views. And it's very low. And I think you know exactly what you're doing, and people can see what you're doing. I'll defend my views. And I think that, you know, so let's leave him out of it. Let's just not talk about my father, because my father isn't here. I'm here.
Okay, well, then do you accept that you shouldn't talk?
Okay,
listen, that's fine. But then do you accept you shouldn't talk about your father on your show? And you shouldn't tell...
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
So it's fine for you to put a story out there which would make most people who listened to that story or watched it at the time on your show conclude that he was racist. It's fine for you to do that, but if I then ask you about it, I'm the one who's being unfair and I've crossed a line. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you're being malicious.
Okay.
Get him, Piers. Piers really cooked him. He really snapped him up. That was like COVID era Piers Morgan. That was top tier Piers Morgan. I was cheering for Piers Morgan. That doesn't happen very often. But it's true. On the one hand, he's saying, my father isn't a racist. How dare you? And then he's saying immediately afterwards, everybody's a little bit racist. Piers Morgan shoots back. You've talked about your father and saying he's not racist. A very obvious, clear contradiction. This, by the way, isn't the first 20 minutes of the interview. And he falls to pieces. He actually looks incredibly fragile. Some people in the comments saying, why are you talking about Nick Fuentes? The reason we're talking about him is he has a huge platform. I watched this interview. I couldn't believe how fragile he was under even the slightest scrutiny. That doesn't mean that Piers Morgan's going to persuade any of his followers or supporters, viewers. Of course not. I don't think that for a second. But I was expecting something a bit more robust. Like Andrew Tate is a fast-talking, intelligent person. This guy was a chump. He just collapsed like a house of cards.
Yeah, and I think it's important to say we're talking about him. It's not like we talk about him often or that we necessarily will again soon. But I think it's important to talk about him because what I said earlier about the Jenga playing and the discourse going further and further right until it reaches this logical conclusion is that could be very academic or contained if it weren't the case that some of these Jenga players are rifling into the corridors of power across the world. And some, you know, what Nick Fuentes does speak to is a certain constituency of people who are just very, very blatantly racist in the American body politic and body politic across Europe that's growing, unfortunately. So I think it's important to talk about it and to, as you say, explore how fragile it is. And on the fragility, it speaks to a cosmic truth about white right-wingers, which is that they are such snowflakes. They're so fragile. Every year has been a vintage year recently for white wine. You know, the guy, just as you say, crumbles as soon as he is subjected to any degree of scrutiny. He takes it extremely personally that his dad's blatantly racist views are being called out. And what these people really believe in is Total freedom of speech for them. They can be as offensive as they want. They can inspire as much violence against ethnic minorities as they like. But as soon as their untrammeled right to say anything, to say everything, is challenged in any way, shape, or form, they fall to pieces. They are enormous snowflakes and sensitive, shrinking violence. And that's the most hilarious thing about them, because they put such an enormous premium on machismo and masculinity and macho-ness and how woke my virus is destroying because it's making weak people. And actually, there it is, perfectly encapsulated and crystallized. Such unbelievable weakness.
I think also this is an advert for what happens when you don't talk or debate with people that disagree with you. Nick Fuentes, for quite justifiable reasons, right? He's only just been remonetized by YouTube recently. He doesn't have these conversations with people that disagree with him. So then Piers Morgan says, well, you've said this. You said most black people should be locked up. Why? Well, for this reason, 1 in 20 of them commit homicide. Well, actually, it's 1 in 100. Actually, it's 70 in 100,000. It just falls apart. Now, I'm not saying that, sunlight is the best disinfectant. Not always. No. But it tells you something, right? And I think the left made that mistake for a pretty long time, that, you can just have conversations with each other. Nobody can challenge you. What happens at the end of that process after a few years, your arguments don't make much sense because true knowledge comes through doubt. And dare I say, Nick Fuentes, by that response, he might have some daddy issues. Now, let's look at Fuentes again on crime and race.
If you're in a high school and truly, if you see a white person who looks like a little autistic, he's got the SSRI stare and he reaches for a backpack, people joke and say, run. Similarly, if you see a jalopy pulling up with a bunch of black people in it and they got their pants around the ankles, you're going to run also. And I'm saying the same thing. The difference is the latter happens much more often. It's much more common. In Chicago, there's like 10,000 carjackings and car thefts every day. It's in the thousands. It happens all the time. How many mass shootings committed by autistic SSRI white people? I don't even know. I mean, it's probably in the single digits in the last decade in this city. That's the difference, and everybody knows that. But you're really just trying to carry water for liberal ideology. It's an ideological position.
I'm really not. I can absolutely say, yes, there is way too much black on black crime, for example, involving guns in Chicago.
And black on white also.
Yes, but there is way too much gun violence in Chicago, right? I mean, it's indisputable. I've got no problem saying that. The difference is I don't then lead myself into a thought process where I have to avoid all black people in case they shoot me.
So again, we looked at that data, and Chicago in recent years has seen between 3 and 5 carjackings a day. 3 to 5. That's really high. That's 3 to 5 too many, but it's not tens of thousands. Even if that number is out by a factor of 10, and of course crime can be underreported for a bunch of reasons, he's talking still complete nonsense, right? Tens of thousands, 3 to 5. 1 in 5, 70 in 100,000. There's a pattern here, folks. Regarding shootings in Chicago, there are between 6 and 7 a day in recent years. Again, way too high. 6 to 7, too many. But it's not tens of thousands of shootings and carjackings every day. We're talking single digits for both. I'm not making excuses. That's really bad. It's not acceptable. It should be solved by politicians. But it's wildly at odds with what he's claiming. Again, do you think quickly this is the same trick of trying to will into existence a series of conditions, a sort of racialized political ferment that catalyzes the conditions for civil war? I mean, that's
100%.
Because that's a huge claim, right? If you're saying that somebody is trying to speak into existence a race war, a civil war where people shoot each other on the street for how they look, presumably then you categorize this guy as a kind of terrorist.
I don't know about the categorization as a terrorist, but with legal implications, but I certainly think it's absolutely apparent that what he's trying to do is foment some kind of race war in the United States. And again, as I mentioned earlier with the Civil War stuff, he's drawing on reservoir of past cases. So, you know, you have in the 1960s, in 1968, you have in Chicago, of all places, the Democratic Convention, and the big thing at the Democratic Convention and at the Republican Convention in Florida is crime and punishment, is law and order. That became the law and order election, right? And law and order was a dog whistle used by Nixon, who won that election, and others, for black on white violence, black on black violence. Basically, it was a racist dog whistle. They used it as code. So again, he knows exactly what he's doing. He's trying to will into existence a race war. I don't doubt that for 1 second. And there's, as far as I'm concerned, there's no secret about it.
We're going to go to our next segment in a moment, but you might be thinking, why talk about this? This is the blueprint for the post-liberal radical right. And by the way, lots of people on the right don't like that. You know, there are people who I've spoken to, reform-curious conservatives, and they say, I watch Nick Fuentes, it makes me want to be woke, right? This is going to be a very important moment, particularly for the American right. And you're right to say there's people like J.D. Vance, pay attention to this crap. Odds on likely, at this moment in time, long way to go, to be the next Republican candidate in 2028. Our final video from this segment, here's Nick Fuentes on women.
You think women want to have the shit beaten out of them, as you said?
Yeah, and it's very disturbing, but it's true.
Do you think your views on women might change if you actually ever had a relationship with one or had sex and actually had a proper relationship? I mean, people say the reason you're so angry about women is you're basically an incel.
Well, I'm not angry about it.
You sound very angry. You sound very, very angry about women.
I'm passionate. It's an issue I'm passionate about.
You're sounding very bitter about women, as if women have done a terrible disservice to you. But when? You don't have relationships, you don't have sex. When are they doing these terrible things to you that's made you so hateful towards women? I'm really curious.
I don't think that was a hateful clip. I think I was laughing. I said they want men to beat the shit out of them. And that's just true. I mean, when you look at the state of modern women, all they do is lay in their bed, doom scroll, they're chilling out. They're getting a little fat. It is what it is. I don't know what the average weight is, but they're getting a little heavy. And any guy that is playing the field these days will tell you that. I mean, and I know a lot of the Chads. I am an incel. I'm friends with a lot of Chads like Bradley Martin, Clavicular. They agree with me. You know, there's sort of like this alliance between the guys that don't have sex and the guys that get the most sex. We know what women are about. It's the guys in the middle. Guys like you in the middle. It's the beta male orbiters that say, she's amazing. You're a misogynistic pig. Because I don't know what that is. I guess
well, come on, let me explain to you what I think it is. I think when a 27-year-old guy who's never got laid, never had a meaningful relationship with a woman, says that women shouldn't be allowed to vote, they should stay at home, that all they do is fantasize about being raped and being beaten up, that's what they want, that they're annoying, that they get fat, that they get ugly. That's a misogynist. Now, you may not understand it because your knowledge of women is so incredibly tiny, but actually you are the embodiment of a misogynist. It couldn't be clearer. And if I was in a way, you have the deep-rooted misogyny of some of the actual boomers I know. Yet here you are, 27 years old. And most of the current studies show that a lot of men are really disenfranchised from society, no longer have physical relationships with women if they've ever had them, never associate with women, and build up instinctively misogynist views about women. And I fear you're in that position. You're just a bit of a lonely guy who wants to get laid and can't for whatever reason. And it's made you bitter about women. And I don't know where that's come from, but it's fascinating.
I don't know about fascinating, but you can see why Piers Morgan's been in this game for 30 years. And I would absolutely bet my house that all of this stems from somebody, most likely a romantic interest, rejecting Nick Fuentes. Quickly, I mean, I don't like labels, actually. When people, you're a misogynist, the word doesn't matter. The reality is, Nick, I'm a Catholic, you're a Catholic. You were in your mother's belly for 9 months. How can you not respect women? This is such a cultural trope through every culture, right? Having respect for women because you literally wouldn't exist without one, right? You couldn't wipe your ass until you were 4 or 5. You couldn't feed yourself. In the wild and nature, you would have just been, left to die. We're not like elephants or giraffes. The minute we're born, we can get up and walk. We're pretty useless for the first couple of years. And all of that work to raise more or less 8 billion plus people on this planet was done by women. That's not woke. It's a really big deal. As somebody with a kid, seeing it is mind-blowing. And that's before we talk about the huge contribution of women into the everyday economy in all kinds of jobs, teachers and counselors, nurses, every job. They do that stuff as well. And this little 27-year-old pudgy schmuck thinks he's better than them. You wouldn't exist without them, mate. And he thinks he's making it. I don't get it. He's meant to be a conservative and he has, I don't know. And it's hate-filled. Of course it's hate-filled. But it's like, I don't know, man. Maybe this is my half Iranian. If you hate women as a man, I think you kind of hate yourself. I think you kind of do.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's just well said. And I think he's a bitter, twisted little boy. That's obvious. I don't think there's too much to say, too much more to say, except that probably it speaks to the wisdom of women that he's obviously been rejected by so many of them. What else can you say? And yeah, he's just a nasty little angry pus pimple of misogyny. And by the way, I feel much more sanguine with labels. I'm very happy to say he's a vile little shit, really.
Yeah. I think labels they're useful, but sometimes people focus on the labels. Is this person this or that? Yeah. Are they a fascist? Are they a racist? I think it's just kind of sad. Anyway, Kieran, I'll see you next Tuesday.
You will indeed. In person again.
Oh, I'm loving it.
Long may the new format reign over us. I hope everybody else has enjoyed it as much as we have.
Oh, I love it. It's been a great show. We did 3 topics, but they were all so interesting. Trump, I think, is losing his mind.
Yeah.
But wow, he talks about big ideas now.
Yeah, yeah. All killer, no filler. It was hit after hit. 3 stories that were just...
Europe's over, Blair's kaput, Nick Fuentes, crazy bastard.
Yeah.
Kieran, thanks for joining me this evening, and thanks to everyone for tuning in. Of course, come back tomorrow for another live stream from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.